Welcome back to part 3 of this HANA Basics for Developers. In this lesson, we're going to take a closer look at the application server layer inside of HANA. Now, in the very first video in this series, we talked about the general architecture of HANA, what makes it unique, where the power and main capabilities of HANA come from. But we also showed you how it's still a relational database. You can use SQL, you can use standard tools against it. I also included this one slide and talked briefly about how we have an embedded application server that we call XSA, or Extended Application Services Advanced Model. Now, that's what we want to dive a little deeper into in this lesson, and I don't want to overwhelm you with too much architecture up front. I want to pretty quickly, start developing things in the system, but it helps to have a little bit of an understanding here. Now, what I would normally do is actually spend a lot of time talking about the architecture up front, and for this set of materials, I wanted to reproduce some of the content that we had before that was out of date. But actually, when we get to the point where we talk about the application server architecture, we have some pretty good materials out there that are not out of date. You have to remember that we did have an older application server, originally called just XS. Now we refer to that older version as XS Classic. It was just a lightweight JavaScript application server embedded inside of HANA. And then a couple years ago, with HANA 1.0 SPS 11, we introduced XS Advanced. And it was sort of an evolution of that idea of the application server that's part of HANA. But we broke it out a little bit and allowed you to scale it individually. And we added more runtimes to it and just made it a larger scale application server. Now, because that was just done a couple years ago, there's actually some good materials that are out there already, and I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time here with you just repeating content that's already available for you to view. And what I would recommend, if you want to do sort of a deeper dive into that application server architecture and get all the terminology and everything before we move on, I'd actually recommend that you go take a look at this HANA 4 course, the Software Development on SAP HANA Delta SPS 11. This is the course where we introduce the concept of XS Advanced and Node.js and HDI and so much of the foundation of our development paradigms that we use now. And although it was HANA 1.0, kind of the XS part of this was ahead of its time. And the concepts that we introduce here are the same, whether we're talking about HANA 1.0 or HANA 2.0. So you can really go view this course. And this is a 1-week course, lecture only, no exercises. It was pretty high level, and really we just took there's probably 2 hours worth of video here where you can go deeply into these concepts and get them nicely introduced. And in particular, at this point, it might be good to go listen to Unit 1, Introduction to SAP HANA XS Advanced. We're going to lay out the architecture and things like that. Now, as I said, for the purposes of what we want to do in this video series, I don't want to repeat all that. People that have seen me present before or seen some of the Open SAP courses, I can spend 45 minutes on this one slide alone talking about the major architectural changes. But I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to do a quicker introduction, and instead, things like Node.js and HDI and containers and microservices, we'll actually hit that a little bit later. As I do the development, we're gonna start a little project and we're gonna just do some development in the Web IDE. And as I do each of the exercises, I'll explain the architecture that goes along with it. So instead of kind of giving you a whole lot of architecture up front, we'll feed it to you a little bit at a time as we go. What I do want to do is I think it's useful to at least have a high level look at this, and at least the first thing that I want to point out is that This is a very important point, is that the old application server architecture, the XS Classic, is still there. We did not take it away with HANA 2.0. We announced deprecation, just like we've announced deprecation for the HANA Studio, but those solutions are still delivered as a part of HANA, and they're still fully supported. The announcement of deprecation means that we're not going to do any new development in them, so they're basically maintenance only. But we have not removed them yet. We announce deprecation, our intention to remove them in the future, and we have a service node out there where we've officially made that announcement of deprecation that we plan to remove XS Classic and HANA Studio in the next major release of HANA after HANA 2.0, whatever that's called. I don't know what the numbering is going to be. None of that's been decided inside of SAP. I don't know when that's going to be, but know that HANA 2.0 is going to have long-term maintenance, just like HANA 1.0 did. When HANA 1.0 ended and SPS 12 was the last SPS, we gave an extended maintenance period for that last SPS. We've made it clear that we're going to do the same thing with HANA 2.0. At some point, we'll move on to a new major release, and the last SPS of HANA 2.0, the last one that will support XS Classic and HANA Studio, will have extended maintenance. And we do this because this new architecture, if you are already doing development, even if it's just database development, is quite a bit different than the XS Classic HANA Studio world. We saw in the previous video the differences in the development paradigms, the fact that we move our repository to Git and we store the design time artifacts outside of HANA. But there's other far-reaching impacts, not just the introduction of, say, Java alongside JavaScript, but this idea of containers and microservices, the idea of containers within the database. And these are all things, as I said, I want to introduce to you a little at a time as we go through the exercises. But know that this is a pretty major change. Once again, even if you're just doing database development, even if you're just doing calculation views, you're impacted by this change, and it's more than just a change to which development tool that you use to do your development. That's why that's why we have both solutions offered in parallel, to give you some time to migrate your current content, to get up to speed, to learn about the new environment. And I know that many of you are, beginning to transition into this new world. When we look at the new world, there's lots of major changes here. We move for the application server layer, we move the user management out of the HANA database. We don't reuse the database user as the business user, application user anymore. We can connect to an external identity provider for authentication. We have, as we said, multiple runtimes that we support, Node.js for JavaScript development, Java development, standard Apache, Tomcat, TomEE, Python support. We're going to see some of this. We're mostly going to concentrate on Node.js, the JavaScript side. I find that most current SAP customers probably come in, and that's the solution they want to use. Also, if you're coming to, say, from the ABAP side of the world, JavaScript, I think, is probably a more comfortable language runtime to start into this environment in than Java would be. But I also want to stress, we're not saying you have to use this application server. The XS Advance is there. Our tools that we deliver run in it. But if you want to do development and connect up with a third-party application server, if you want to continue to use ABAP as your application server, .NET, Java, not as part of XSA, that's all fine. We have the connectivity. We support other application servers. That's fine. Or maybe some of you don't even do application server development. Maybe you're a pure database developer. You only do calculation views. You only do stored procedures. You connect reporting tools up. That's a pretty common use case. Not everybody's going to use the application server. But I think it's still good to know capabilities are there. We're going to do most of our development within the database itself anyway. But this application server gives us the ability to host lightweight SAP UI5, HTML5 applications right off of the HANA database, to service enable data, to open up WebSocket connectivity to the data. So it's a way to expose your HANA data to the outside. It's a great option for doing that because it's there in the HANA system. It's embedded. You get an all-in-one box experience. The administration is all in one place, so it can be a great way to have a low cost of ownership for these types of applications. So as we go through this course, we're gonna explain really end-to-end development. We are going to start more on the database side, but once again, it's pretty hard to avoid having to know at least a little bit about the XS layer, because as I said, our own development tools run in there, and we're impacted even at the database development level by concepts of deployment and things like that we'll talk about in the next couple of videos. Now, the one thing that I want to do to help kind of make this a little bit more real for everyone, it's one thing to show slides with architecture. I actually prefer to kind of show you in the system what this looks like, and I want to switch over here to the HANA cockpit, and what we see here is the process overview of the HANA system. And these are things that you're probably already familiar with, like the name server, the compile server. The name server or index server is really the heart of HANA. That's where all the SQL is executing. It's where all the joins are taking place. It's actually where most of the memory on a system is allocated, because that's where the data is stored in memory. So that's really the heart and soul of HANA itself. Now, you might notice here we have this DI server. This is a new component as of HANA 1.0 SPS 11, and this is actually where we do the deployment of new database artifacts. So this is one of the major things we heard from customers, is that deployment of new database artifacts, or activation as we called it in the old environment, took too long. Particularly large calculation views with a lot of dependencies, it could take hours to activate, and sometimes you got failed activations, partial activations, and there was a lot of disruption to the business. Maybe views couldn't be ran while a new activation was going on. So one of the major things that we wanted to do in HANA 1.0 SPS 11 is really improve that experience. And one of the major ways we did that is we pulled activation out, which we now call deployment, and we put it in its own dedicated process, and completely rewrote the way that we do this. It's now multi-threaded. We can do parallel deployments. In the old environment, we could basically only do one activation at a time. This new deployment, this DI server, DI, by the way, stands for Deployment Infrastructure. You'll sometimes just see it referred to as DI or HDI, more commonly, HANA Deployment Infrastructure. But it was a complete rethinking of the way that things work. Now when we do deployment, it's all or nothing. There's no partial activation like we had in the old environment. Either everything goes to the new state or everything gets rolled back. So better consistency, less impact on the business. It's much faster because of the technical rewrite and the changes that we made underneath, pulling it out into its own process. Better parallelization. We use the graph engine to determine the dependency tree. So it's much faster to determine those dependencies, much more accurate. So just overall, it's a much better experience, a much faster experience, much less disruptive. Okay. We'll see more on this in the next couple of exercises. We'll start developing some database artifacts, and we'll see some other impacts to this new HDI approach. There's other rules that are involved here that go along with it. I don't want to get into all that in this video. Just know, we're looking more at the technical infrastructure here. The other three parts that I really want to point out here are the ones that begin with XS. So the XS execution agent, the XS controller, and the XS Uaa Server. These are really the three processes that we see at the HANA level that make up XS Advance. And you might notice here I actually don't have XS Engine process. That would be the process for the old XS Classic. My particular system, I've already disabled XS Classic. I did not install it with XS Classic. So that's a possibility. Although the default installation still has XS Classic for backwards compatibility, it is an option if you've already migrated all your content to go ahead and turn off XS Classic. And in fact, if you were building a new system from scratch today, I'd probably recommend that you don't even install XS Classic to begin with. And that's what I've done here in my system. So these three that begin with XS, they're all XS Advanced. Okay, so the three parts that we have here, the Uaa Server, that's user authentication and authorization. So that's the part that communicates with the identity provider and does the authentication, does the logging in of the user into the system, generates the security tokens. That's all its own separate process. That's pretty straightforward. I think the other two parts here, the controller and the execution agent, you can kind of think of them as one thing. The execution agent is actually monitoring the execution of various runtimes. The controller is handling the start and stop of the XS layer, the application server layer, doing some monitoring, doing some routing. But for the most part, this is sort of the heart of the application server layer. Now, what's different compared to a traditional application server, whether it be ABAP or XS Classic or even a traditional Apache Java application server. In those traditional application servers, this controller or this combination of controller and XS agent, they would actually have a lot of memory allocated to them. And all of your applications that you write would execute within this controller or this execution agent. Even in ABAP, we've got the dialog work process model where you create multiple dis plus work processes at the operating system level, but you still have many different ABAP applications running inside a small subset of these dis plus work processes. You can kind of think of the controller and the execution agent as that distribution agent, but in XS Advance, we use a microservice architecture, which means your individual application, your individual services, they aren't all running inside this XS controller or this XS execution agent. Each of them actually create their own little mini app server or web server. And from an operating system level standpoint, they're completely independent entities. Let's switch over here to the OS level. This is the Linux OS that my HANA system is running on, and from here, let me just go ahead and switch to my SID ADM user, and let's log in to the XSA command line. So although there's a web-based XSA admin cockpit, we also have a command line version that allows you to basically do all the same things. That's one of the nice things design-wise about XS Advanced. We tried to make everything available from a command line and with a RESTful interface, so it can be scripted, and with a web UI, so you can kind of have your choice of how you want to interact with the system as an administrator or developer. And what I'm going to issue is a command here, XS apps. That's just going to list all the applications and application services that are running on my system. And what you see here, there's a lot of different applications. Even the HANA cockpit, which we might think of as one application, actually has many different application services here. We see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 separate applications. And each of these separate applications, these little microservices, have a role to play. They might be just one part of the larger application, but each of these are individual entities running with their own OS process. And as you can see here, we can tune them individually. The amount of memory that's allocated to each individual services, the amount of instances, we can scale and run multiple instances of a single service. And if I would now look at it from the OS level, if I would just do a top here from the OS level, what you're going to see is, yes, I have the access controller and the name server and index server. That's the heart of HANA, and that's actually where most of the memory is allocated. But what you see here is, look at these Java and Node.js processes. They're not named. They're just saying, oh, I'm running a Java VM. I'm running a Node.js VM, as far as the operating system is concerned. But each of these are the individual applications that we just saw in the previous screen. So that means when you're developing, not only do you have a choice of the runtime, you can choose for your whole application. Part of it could be made up of Node, part of it could be made up of Java, part of it could be made up of Python. But each one of those parts is going to run as its own operating system process. That means it can be scaled independently. I can give more memory to one part of my application than another. It means that if one of them crashes, it doesn't take out the whole application, just that one little part needs to be restarted. It means if I want to patch something, I don't necessarily have to patch the entire application. I can make a change to just one of the application services. It also means that when we deploy these application services, we're actually taking a copy of the entire runtime. So each one of these services, when I come back here and I do XS apps that make up a particular application, some of these might be Java, some of them might be Node.js, but they're not using a copy of Java or Node from that central controller or execution agent. Each of them get their own private copy, and all the supporting libraries and everything that go along with it. And that makes for a very stable application over time, because you might upgrade the XS runtime, and it might make a new version of Node or Java available. We can do that. I can say XS runtimes. Runtimes. Sorry, get the right command here. If I issue the command XS runtimes, it shows us we've got different versions of Node, we've got different versions of Java available on this system, and I can target different ones. But notice bound applications. I've got some applications that are running still under Node version 6, 11 applications in fact, and I've got 20 applications running as Node version 8. Once an application is deployed, it stays with that version of the runtime that it was deployed with. So it's stable over time, and you can decide when you want to update that individual application to the latest available version. Now, this comes with a little bit of a downside as well. We'll see that in the next video when we start doing some development. It's going to take a little bit longer at development time when we want to begin to test our applications, because we have to wait for the system to create that little private application server. It also means that if you have multiple developers working on a system, even the same application, they're each getting their own private little application server for each part of their application. So it takes time, it takes system resources to spin up those application servers, but what you get in the ability to debug without disrupting other developers, to be able to do development in parallel on different features and not overwrite and disrupt each other, and the ability to have stable applications once they're deployed in production, to be able to tune applications individually. It's worth that extra time in the development and the deployment process to take the private copy of the application server. And this really follows an industry trend that we see here. The concept of microservices isn't something that SAP invented. It's really something that we see evolving, coming out of the cloud, where of course we have very elastic hardware infrastructure underneath our applications, and a microservice environment is uniquely designed to take advantage of that elastic computing to have to be able to variably adapt to the amount of system resources that are available. And with that, I want to close out this unit on application server architecture. As I said, didn't explain everything about XS Advanced, but hopefully you have a little bit of an idea of where it fits into the overall HANA architecture and some of the benefits and uniqueness of it. We're going to learn a lot more about it and containers and deployment as we begin developing our sample application in the upcoming videos.